Hi everyone, today I have a bit of a long video. Reddit's challenge of the week was to complete the classical Jool5 mission, basically land on every moon of Jool and plant a flag there. Rules allowed us to build the ship in space, but I wanted to one-up the whole thing and I think I managed to do that. First off, I sent the whole ship in one go and you'll see that I did not just go to Jool's moons. Anyways, here is my entry. The inventively named Jool5 ship consists of 5 landers on top of a massive nuclear-powered launcher. To put all of this in orbit around Kerbin was surprisingly easy though. All I needed was boosters, more boosters, and then some boosters and struts. The result looks nothing like anything you'd see fly in real life, but hey, I managed, so it's good for me. A few stages later, a lot of time warping to reach the nice transfer window, and here we burn to Jool. I'll spare you some small burns every now and then so that the video can remain sort of short. To give you an idea of the size of the mission, we are talking about 10 hours of rush on this one. Probably one of the biggest I've ever done. Anyways, the Jool system is really nice to travel into, and one of the things I especially love is that you can use stylo or lathe to capture yourself into the sphere of influence. And that's just what I did with a carefully planned flyby of lathe that put me in an eccentric orbit about the same semi-major axis as lathe 1. So good so that a few orbits and a small burn later, I caught another flyby that I could fine-tune and use later to put Jeb and Val into a stable orbit around our first target. Considering the complexity of the ship and some parts with a low temperature tolerance, I stayed away from the atmosphere and captured this using some good old propulsion. Now is the time to put one of our Kerbals in our first lander, specially designed to work inside lathe atmosphere. This one will aerobrake nicely, and I used the Trajectory mod to plan a descent path that put me on land. It took a few orbits and a lot of fine-tuning, but I did manage to aim land. From there on it's pretty easy because landing on lathe is basically a parachute job. Just never forget the drag chutes that can open at higher speeds, otherwise you might end up hitting the ground before you can open your regular parachutes. So first flag done, let's board again and take off now. Many more places to visit today. Since we have an atmosphere here and the lander is quite light, we can use some jet engines, which we will. By doing so, when time comes to start the rocket engine, it is only for a small push that will take us into orbit. I know a lot of people like to use planes on lathe, but considering the general design of my ship, I went for a more rocket-shaped lander. It's pretty easy to reach orbit here on jet engines. I really like lathe. I have a lot of spare Delta V in this lander, but no docking port to transfer the fuel. No problem there, we may have way more that we need. Let's just EVA back into the mothership and head for the next destination. Val is quite possibly my favorite of Jool's moons. You can reach it easily with its 0-degree inclination, and the gravity is pretty weak, but not so weak that it takes ages to descend. Also, the landmark is pretty, and that's a good thing. This particular lander is a generic design that I made for the 3 low-gravity moons of Jool. Surprisingly enough, it's enough to land and take off on and from those moons. The only thing out of the ordinary here is that on my first try I messed up a little and collided the lander and mothership. So I had to reload to a previous quick save point, and unfortunately I realized later that my flag planting was not in this quick save but right after it. Anyways, back to the mothership we go and dock. This lander and the second one I took as a backup in case something went wrong will both go on the side of the main tank of the launcher stage. All the fuel is drained back into these big tanks so as to reduce the weight of the landers and avoid them wobbling too much when the ship is accelerating. I did all of this docking part on the dark side of Val, forgetting I was recording, so I'll spare you the dark video and we'll just go to my least favorite moon now, Tylo. Tylo needs a lot of delta V to land or take off, and its gravity is roughly that of Kerbin or Lathe without an atmosphere. Circularizing around Tylo is normally a matter of a few tenths of meters per second, but I wanted to play it safe and took the ship to a lower orbit. Once in orbit and the lander separated from the mothership, I used the 4 Reliant engines to bleed most of the horizontal speed as fast as possible. After that came the Poodle to suicide burn this beauty onto the surface. Never forget to bring ladder here, because your jetpack will just be of no help at all. The best observers will have picked on the fact that I used a retrograde orbit this time, and there is no reason for it, just that I did not pay attention actually. Whenever I land on Tylo, I always use a very large suicide burn because the gravity here can make your ship take up speed very fast. Once again, flag, takeoff, orbit, rendezvous, and once again I left a lot of delta V in orbit to become waste and EVA back into the main ship. Despite its heavy gravity, taking off from Tylo can be done on small engines if your craft is light enough. Mine could have taken off with a full tank of gas. A weird thing happened here on the readings from Kerbal Engineer, and I lost indication on my last stage. I was really worried that it would malfunction, but it looks like the bug was from staging or something. Now that Tylo's lander and Lathe's lander are both off our main ship, it looks a lot different and it also performs way better. After Tylo come Bob and Paul, 2 small rocks with low gravity and differently inclined orbits. Since their orbits are both so high, changing inclination is rather cheap delta V wise. This is when our 2 secondary fuel tanks ran out, so I left them there while changing planes and boarded one of our beloved Kerbals into one of the landers with a full tank of gas. The whole idea was to catch an intercept with Bob around the ascending or descending node. Again, I did just that, fine-tuned the path of the flyby to lower it as much as possible, and circularized there with a lot lighter ship. It took a lot less fuel and time to do so. I only corrected my inclination enough to be able to catch Bob. Now it's time to come to a low inclination orbit relative to this moon. As I said, gravity is low here. I could have managed with half a tank or even less, but I like to play it safe. With 3600 meters per second of delta V to land on Bob, it is indeed quite safe, and here we go to plant one more flag. Landing on such moons with low gravity and high terrain is painful, always having to switch ships to time warp, but hey, I made it, so I'm happy. Once all of the bob operations are done, I repeat again the now routine procedure and dock back this lander to the ship before transferring the fuel back into the main tank. One more transfer to do, and Paul, here we come. It's kind of weird, but I realized that Paul is the only celestial body I never went to before, so it's kind of a big moment for me. Well, it would have been if all the weird ground scatter didn't kill my frame rate. Finally, our last stop was Paul. Its orbit is differently inclined than Bob's, but we will have to perform another plane change. When it came to landing here, I aimed for a high mountain underneath and ended up stuck on a slope. The gravity is so low that I can move my ship just by using the SAS. And now that our last flag is planted, it's time to take off again. Anyways, now it's time to ditch those landers and go back to Kerbin. I've been a fool on this one and left some fuel I could have put back into the tank by docking, but I got lazy and figured I had enough. You'll see this little amount of fuel could have saved my life later. The return trip to Kerbin's sphere of influence takes a while, and I could have performed it from Paul's sphere of influence, but I exited it instead and burned from a slightly higher orbit than that of Paul's. Again, I needed to change inclination, fine-tune my path to pass as close as Kerbin as I can without going through the atmosphere. That's when I realized my ship still had way more fuel than needed, and I could do something fun like visiting Kerbin's 2 Moon 2. It took quite a big and long burn to circularize our orbit around Kerbin. The atmosphere could have helped, but I was a bit scared and figured I still had enough delta V if I was to just capture us into a highly eccentric orbit. I started by Minmus because I feel like it was the more efficient way, although I would advise you not to quote me on this. I caught an intercept quite fast with a small correction and landed on higher terrain to save a little fuel. Considering the shape of my ship, I did not stay there long enough to see if it was going to tip. Just a kiss from the engines to the ground and back to flying. A quick burn later and I catch an encounter with the moon. Okay, I have to admit it was a lucky break on this one, and I'm quite happy about this. The moon's gravity being stronger than Minmus, I stayed even less time here and took off almost instantly. Escaping the moon's sphere of influence was a breeze up and until the time I ran out of fuel about 10 liters too soon. Aiming the right direction, I tried using the decoupler to cover the difference. It did help, but not quite enough. By now I have been to the 5 moons of Jool, to the 2 moons of Kerbin, and my ship is stuck in space. Not willing to stay stranded so close to home, Jeb and Valentina took turn jetpacking against the lander can. It took a few trips, but periapsis finally came to an altitude I could use to aerobrake, and started to jump of happiness on the inside. A few passes through the atmosphere later, and our proud Kerbals came down the surface of their home planets, relying on enough chutes to be safe and sound a few seconds later when they touched ground. It took a few years, and I'm pretty sure they hate each other now, but they'll be welcomed as heroes and will party their green asses off for a few days. Pending the next mission. Anyways, it was Crazy Kerbin trying crazy technologies for you. Don't forget to subscribe for more, and have a nice day in space.